Dangerously Professional Youth Baseball Podcast.
Dangerously Professional is a great launching point to all the killers and $100 billers. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Driveline Academy Podcast, the world's most dangerous youth baseball podcast. I'm your host, Deven Morgan, Direct Youth Baseball Driveline, founder of the Driveline Academy, and I'm joined, as per usual, by my brother, my partner, my co-host, Driveline Academy Assistant Director of Driveline Academy International Man of Mystery, Jeremy Tectiel. And today, boys and girls, this podcast is like none other that's ever been done in the history of the Driveline Academy Podcast because we have a guest. Deven, what type of guest do you mean? Another Driveline employee? No. Not a former Driveline employee, not a current Driveline employee, not a former Driveline trainee, not a current Driveline trainee. We have an actual living and breathing guest with us in the studio for the first time ever.
Really?
Truly ever. I guess, well, we had my daughter in here and did a podcast, but I made her, so it's pretty easy access to bring that guest in. And instead, we have David Yeager with us, who is the author of 10 to 25, The Science of Motivating Young People. David and I connected because he is a podcast listener, a self-avowed podcast listener, and we got a chance to talk over email and then did a Zoom kind of talking about some of the stuff that we think is appropriate, and I will go so far as to say necessary when it comes to understanding kids, because if you're talking about youth baseball, you're talking about understanding children, and there's some ideal pathways to do that, and some that are not ideal. And as a very old person, I suffered through some of those unideal paths. So, and I know, Jeremy, you've gone through some of that stuff as well. So both of us are pretty convicted about there being a better way to do this thing. But before we get into that, we obviously have to address housekeeping. So we'll do that briefly. Axbat.com, code DL20. We get you 20% off Axbat for all of your stick and ball sport paraphernalia, training bats, game bats, all the stuff that Axe has. You get 20% off. Axbat.com, Axbat.com, code DL20, as in D as in
David.
D as in David. That's a layup, right? D as in David, L as in leopard, 20 will get you 20% off. Oh no, we did dynamic leopard yesterday.
L as in layup.
Oh, okay. L as in layup. Perfectly. Yeah. David Layup 20 will get you 20% off at Axbat.com. We talked yesterday about Academy Flex as a mechanism for flexibly integrating Driveline's training with your current youth team. So you can come in 5 times a month. You're going to test, retest. You're going to do Driveline stuff in the gym, and you're going to work alongside remotely with a Driveline trainer who's going to break down your mocap reports, etc. Briefly, I will stump for the shortest term version of that, which is the Driveline Academy Snapshot. You come in and it's a 90-minute assessment. We call it a snapshot, but it is our assessment. You're going to spend 30 minutes in the lab getting your biomechanics on the hitting side. You're going to spend 30 minutes in the lab getting biomechanics on the throwing side. You're going to spend about 20 minutes over in a high-performance area getting your force plate data on athletic production. Throw in another 10 minutes of the dynamic warm-up there at the beginning of the session, and it is 90 minutes in and out to get more information than you can glean anywhere else in the world, the known universe even, about the performance of your youth baseball player. And that means youth, everything from, we've had 8 and 9-year-old kids all the way up to, 16, 17, 18-year-old high schooler players. That's who the snapshot's for. It's a one-shot deal. You come in and get all access to all this information, and then you can kind of do with it what you will after you have that meeting with the trainer to kind of review it. What else? The Youth Underlit Smash Bat is obviously the best $79 you could spend to develop the discrete skill of moving the bat fast accurately. It's pretty good. You should go buy that. Youth Power Bat is the best $99 you can spend to develop the discrete skill of bat speed training. You buy the bat, you run the program that comes with it, you swing it, bat speed goes up, better things happen. Housekeeping, fini. Okay. Man, I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah.
Because had I not kind of gone down the path of like finding a picture of Jean Piaget, and he's like this just delightful looking Swiss dude, giant beard, smoking a pipe. He's got like a stack of books behind him. Like I can see the picture in my mind. But that learning about Piaget and understanding kind of the concrete operational stage and the formal operational stage stuff, changed everything about how I thought about coaching kids. It changed literally everything because it started to provide some answers to, I think, I had been coaching. I mean, let me think about this. So all that Piaget stuff worked its way into the Youth Baseball Development Certification course, which we launched in 2020. I started at Driveline in 18. So it was probably like 18 or 19 that in the old 5-4 building, and I was, doing some, what we often do at Driveline, which is like I had my job for the day for this time is now done. Let me research the other stuff that like solves problems related to whatever the initiative was. And I found the Piaget stuff and started to kind of read about this idea that inherently, for anybody that's not familiar with Jean Piaget or the theory, and David, please bury a hatchet in me if I screw this up. But the general idea of like this idea that there is a concrete operational stage of cognitive development and then the formal operational stage that comes after, the big differentiator there, if I'm understanding this and not sausaging it too poorly, is that it's not until that formal operational stage that kids start to understand concepts around abstract thought.
Yeah.
And that prior to that stage, it's just a tool that they don't have in their toolbox, which to me became specifically relevant to the emotional variance that I was seeing on the field with really young kids at that time. Because, in 2018,
He was 9.
yeah, my kid was 9. So my son was 9, my daughter was 11, and both of them were still pre-formal operational stage. And in coaching both of them at that time, I could just remember moments on the field where I'm trying to give them context. That was already a thing that I was trying to do. I was trying to give them context about how their effort and attention and attitude was, and then how output, like inputs and outputs, and trying to help them understand that way. And they didn't really get it immediately.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, this doesn't really make sense to me. So it's that Piaget stuff, man, that just set me on a very, very different path about trying to understand the athletes that I was coaching.
And so then I'm just curious, I'm happy to, I'm a developmental psychology professor, so I'm happy to review all this stuff, but how did that then shift what you did and how you thought? Like, what was the new insight?
I think the biggest insight for me was there was no longer a presumption on my behalf that things that I took obvious about the way that I wanted to frame the experience was going to be obvious for the people that it was most critical to have that perspective.
Yeah.
So as the parent / coach, I think I had already had the revelation that the way that I started coaching was bad, just straight up bad. And it wasn't necessarily even bad about the skill stuff, but it was bad about the mechanism through which I communicated and coached kids in a way that wasn't suited to them. And I had already kind of started to figure that stuff out.
Yeah.
But I think the next leap that kind of came from this understanding was like, okay, the burden's on me. It really, truly is on me. And if I sit there just kind of waiting for kids to have a tool in their cognitive and emotional toolbox that they simply can't access, then I'm kind of just like holding my breath, waiting for the impossible to happen. And maybe it's not impossible. And I guess that's a good...
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's super interesting. So, like, the way we would think about it as a developmental psychologist is that take a kid who's on the mound having a meltdown.
Yeah.
And they need to not blame themselves for being a bad baseball player in general.
Yep.
But instead be like, oh, I'm not having repeatable mechanics, or I'm not doing this or that to be accurate. So what we want them to do is think of it as a temporary, solvable frustration that they can learn a life lesson from, not an all or nothing diagnosis of being a bad person or being a failure. And some kids' minds will go to this is all or nothing, like I'm bad, nobody likes me, and nobody cares about me. And that, of course, accelerates this downfall where now they're kicking the glove on the mound.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what we often want to do, like if that was an adult, we'd be like, oh, you're learning from mistakes and failure. But that's an abstraction.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's like an analogy or a metaphor that the kid has to then apply to a different concrete situation.
Yeah.
We as adults would be like, oh, I remember that time I gave a presentation in class and it kind of bombed. And then I learned from it. I did a better job. And then the next time the presentation was better. And that's kind of like pitching or hitting.
Yeah.
But that's super abstract and like very hard for kids to basically go from a concrete level of like, here's exactly what happened. Here's a verbal description, an abstract one about how that applies. And now I'm going to do it in a different setting. And so if you're sitting there waiting for a kid to be like, why don't you understand that this is a life lesson? Why don't you understand that you're building grit and resilience? it's very hard for them to do that at an abstract level. Is that more or less what you were thinking?
100%. And because I think it clicked for me because now all of a sudden for lack of a better phrase, like the painting with a very broad brush about kind of the outcome of the experience, it all of a sudden made sense. It made sense to me that kids have this very like red light, green light when they're walking off the field. Green light, I feel good relative to whatever it is that they value about the output of that experience.
Yeah.
And then if it was red light, it's just like that light is like real red, right? It's not like I'm cruising through the intersection and it's like it's going slowly from yellow to red and I'm talking myself into the fact that I didn't just blow that red light. It's green or it's red. And it seemed like there wasn't a lot of space in the middle.
So what Piaget is a cognitive developmentalist, also kind of social cognitive. So
yeah.
Classic cognitive is a kid sees a ball roll on the ground and it goes behind another object. Does the kid think the ball is still there when it's behind the occluder? And so that is the whole tradition of research. Social cognitive is more like, what are other people thinking about me on the basis of my behavior? So am I making guesses about other people's judgments and evaluations of me?
Yeah.
And he crossed both. But in our work, I'm mainly thinking about the more social side. It's not just can kids understand the abstract concept of three when they've seen three, dots on the screen.
Yes.
It's like, what kind of person am I, and what kind of person am I viewed as on the basis of my performance? And where Piaget was critiqued, I think rightly so, is when he was very hard-nosed about very impermeable boundaries between stages. He's
yes.
Like, you're at this exact stage right now, and therefore you cannot at all do this other stage. That's kind of unsatisfying because, well, how in the world would you ever get to the next stage? So the way I think of it more is like kids won't naturally make certain abstract leaps in their minds unless the adults in their lives draw out those lessons for them and help. And then over time, they learn to make those connections. Let me give you like a concrete example. In some of our research, we think a lot about stress.
Okay.
And this is one thing I talked about in the Huberman lab, and we have a paper in Nature a couple years ago where we talk about how society in general has the wrong view of stress. We tend to think it's always bad. It always debilitates your performance.
Yeah.
If you're feeling stressed and I care about you, then my job is to remove your distress as a parent. And you can see if you just look on Google Images for stress relief memes. First of all, they're mostly cats. I don't understand. It'll be like a cat reaching for a cookie, and it'll be like growth mindset. And I'm not sure how this cat is supposed to be comforting to me in my stress. But you get through page like 3 on Google Images, and then it's not the non-cat memes, and but then it's stuff like go for a walk, go into nature, take a bubble bath, like drink chamomile tea. But if I'm like about to like hit against a 95 mile an hour, like that is not the time for me to like take a bubble bath, right? Or if I'm giving a presentation to like my boss's boss, like I need to be amped up and hyper focused and like attuned and attentive to what I'm focusing on. And that stress is not a sign I'm about to fail. That's a sign like my muscles and brain are getting oxygenated blood that are helping those cells in the brain and the muscles to perform to their level of preparation. And the reason why your heart's racing is because you've got adrenaline and epinephrine and all these other hormones that are getting throughout the body more quickly to help optimize performance. If you only ever name stress as a bad thing, then you feel your heart racing, you feel your lungs, going seriously crazy, and you think, this is my body preparing for damage and defeat.
Yeah. Right.
So that's like an abstract lesson that you kind of want athletes to have, and I want my kids to have if they're going to be in English class giving a presentation, or if they're trying to hold someone's hand for the first time, which is terrifying, or merge on the freeway for the first time. I want that exhilaration to be a go signal, not a stop signal, unless it's something truly idiotic that you shouldn't be doing, and then like listen to your body. But so the question is like, how would any kid learn that abstract lesson that might be very different if it's the holding hand situation, the hitting the 90 mile an hour fastball situation, or the merging on the freeway, when in fact we know the bodily response is similar across those. And the example I often tell, and I write about it in the book, is my daughter was 7th grader, and it was like the time for the audition for cello first chair at the end of the year to see where you go for orchestra. And I don't do orchestra. I don't know anything about it, but she told me she was very nervous. We get in the car, and she's like, I have butterflies on my stomach. I don't think I could do it. I'm going to fail. And I'm like, as a developmental psychologist of adolescence, I have been preparing for this moment my entire life.
Let's go. Let's go.
It's like, if I know, there's a lot of things I don't know, but like
Yeah.
I know specifically what to say in this instance. And I was like, Scarlett, you know what I'm going to say to you? And to my surprise, she was like, oh yeah, you're going to tell me that the butterflies are because I care deeply about doing a good job.
Yeah.
And my heart's racing because I'm getting blood to my muscles, and then I'm going to like use my muscle memory and do a great job.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, did you learn something I told you? Like a teenager listened to me for the first time. It's incredible. And she was like, yeah, you said this 2 years ago. And I had forgotten, but when she was in Lake Geneva, north of Chicago, and she was going to water ski for the first time, I'm holding the skis behind her.
Yeah.
And she's like holding the rope. Uncle Luke has the boat, about to like rev it. And she's like, I'm really nervous. I have butterflies on my stomach.
Yeah.
And I said, well, you know, your muscles are going to be stronger when they have more oxygen because the cells are going to be more effective. So the reason why your heart's racing, you're breathing, I gave her the whole spiel. And I'm like, you're going to pop up and have the time of your life, and you're never going to forget it. And she did. And I just floated there in the lake in Wisconsin for like 30 minutes and didn't say a word about it for 2 years. And the reason I tell that story is that, you know, you could have said she was at kind of a concrete operational stage in 4th or 5th grade.
Right.
But I was kind of there to name the experience.
Right.
And what kids experience is often undifferentiated, like physiological arousal that they don't know how to name.
Yeah.
And they will make up a name for it. They'll call it fear, anxiety, you know, disaster, failure. But you can be there to name it one thing or another. And once they realize that better label for their arousal works for them and solves their goals or their conflicts, then they can start transferring it and applying it.
I mean, is it crazy to also say that that by creating that framework and naming it of their own volition, that to a degree it's kind of like it's not an invader that's like breached our coastline.
Yeah.
Right. It's like a thing that I understand that my body is doing, and now to a certain degree or another, if I can't control it, at least I'm not fighting it. I'm not attaching that like, oh, there's this looming sense of dread which results in my heart palpitation, my knees are weak, my arms are sweaty. I hate Eminem, but I'll give the reference here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what they experience is the intensity of the feeling, and until you have life experience, you don't know what your body is doing.
Yeah.
And a lot, and so it really helps to name it in the right way that then you're giving them a starting hypothesis that they then confirm when we're up against almost falling off the cliff of stress and anxiety, but they didn't.
Yeah.
They named it as a resource to be useful, and then they accomplished a goal. And I last Friday, I gave this exact talk to Steve Young, the former quarterback for his group, and I was pretty nervous because he's pretty successful under pressure.
Yeah.
And he was like, this is 100% what I told myself when I was like winning Super Bowls.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good evidence for this idea, but what no one had really studied is how a kid learns it.
Yeah.
And for those of us who are coaches, we just have a vague sense that our kids will learn character and life lessons if we're kind of around enough.
Yeah.
And they're going to learn this stuff. And that's how many people justify the insane investment in youth sports.
Sure.
Right? Is like, even if you're not going pro or whatever, you're learning to deal with adversity. You're learning to overcome challenges.
Yeah.
But like, we're leaving a lot of leverage on the table by kind of failing to optimize a lot of the ways in which kids are actually learning those lessons, because they're not taking the abstract takeaways from them.
Right.
And the last thing I'll say about this is there's an interesting parallel to teaching kids how to overcome phobias. So, like, if a kid's afraid of a snake, most reliable way to overcome fear of a snake is exposure therapy.
Right.
But you don't do the full Indiana Jones throw you in a pit of snakes. Like, that's very bad therapy.
That'd be bad parenting.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on the kind of snake, but no,
I mean, I'm actually just thinking about my son who is deathly afraid of spiders. And it's just like, all right, we just Indiana Jones this thing, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Well, what I'm telling you is to hide spiders in his bed. That's what I'm saying. Just
Perfect.
kidding.
Good luck, D.
But like what you do in exposure therapy is you first like look at a picture of a snake, and then the next session you like in the same room as a snake.
Yeah.
And then eventually you build, and what they think is you have to be up against the thing that you're most afraid of that you can barely handle, and then realize you did it. And then it turns out that if the therapist then debriefs the experience with you in a way where you take away a lesson of, see, you could be in the room.
Yeah.
That the number of minutes spent preparing before the snake exposure is unrelated to how quickly you extinguish the phobia.
Got it.
It's the minutes spent after the terrifying emotional experience where you process what it means. And that's why we think a lot of our work on mindset is important, is because it's your mental model of how you interpret experiences like that.
Right.
That you process often post hoc, but then you apply into the future for other ones.
You know, I was having a conversation with my daughter this weekend, and you know, she's 17 and is going through life the way that most 17-year-olds experience it, which is you're on the precipice of like the next thing. You're still governed by the thing that you have to do now. You have to go to high school. You have to attend these classes that you're not. I mean, she's old enough to kind of realize that there's some things that she's learning in high school that are just not directly relevant.
Or just
to
busy work. You know.
Right. And that's a whole different conversation about the state of American, education. But anyways, we had this conversation about kind of the way that stuff affects, right? And what I tried, and probably didn't do the best job of this initially, but that's just parenting 101, right? As you're going to try it the first time, and you're going to screw it up, and then you're going to try to do it again and explain it better. And I was trying to kind of help her understand I think that there's a lot of power in the intention that you like bring to how am I going to frame this? And to a degree, in my mind, I'm saying that to her because my takeaway from, again, a lot of the Piaget stuff was the idea that, that the formal operational stage doesn't start until, in his framework, until 14 or whatever, and that it continues on until adulthood. Like when I presented about that at the ABCA convention back in the day, I made like a little pithy comment about how some of the parents that we see in youth baseball or coaches that we see on youth baseball seem to still be working through the formal operational stage in terms of their ability to provide context. But I was trying to help her understand that, like, it's not that you do, I think, have the opportunity internally for yourself to kind of define the way that you're going to approach these type of things. You can look at it and say like, hey, this spider terrifies me. It terrifies me. It terrifies me. It terrifies me to a degree that I'm so irrational in my response to the spider that like I'll see it and it's like barely the size of a nickel. And I'll run out of the room screaming and I'll say, "Did you see that giant spider?" And then if you go back and you're like, "Oh, that spider is barely the size of a nickel. It can't hurt me." To a degree, I have some amount of like autonomy and direction about how I frame that experience. And if that's partially right, then that also relates to sport. And it also relates to sport participation. And it also relates to the way that kids can be taught to provide context for themselves about what this stuff means.
Yeah, the key distinction that we often make, and this is going back 20, 30 years of research, is between a challenge type response to stress or a threat type response.
Okay.
And the threat type response, interestingly, starts from how the mind evaluates, or what we call appraises, some experience. So let's say you're in the batter's box, and that's a potential stressor. Because
right.
You're in competition, you have to hit a moving ball, your parents are staring at you, your whole team is counting on you.
Yep.
Right. And so there's a social problem you're trying to solve. There's like a power problem you're trying to solve with
yep.
the coach yelling at you to keep your elbow up, and
yep.
the other team's cheering against you. And so there's a lot going on, and you have to hit a moving ball.
Yeah.
And if you're my kids, you're also a goof, and like you can't. It's hard to do.
A lot of
it's
kids.
Hard for everybody.
A lot of kids. A lot of them that we have.
Yeah. And so it's like all that's happening. So we would say that's a high demand situation. And then the mind says, all right, do I have the resources to meet that demand?
Right.
So there's two dimensions that we think of in our scientific approach, the demand and the resources. And the side note is that's important because society tends to think of stress simply in terms of the demand. How hard is the thing?
Yes.
I'm really stressed. And then when people say I'm really stressed, they often mean the demand is higher than my resources to meet the demand.
Yeah.
This is what I'm asked to do. This is what I feel like I can do. When listeners hear someone say I'm really stressed, what they think it means is the demands are too high. I should reduce demand.
Right.
But often what you need is to increase resources.
Right. You need to change the allocation.
demand.
Yeah.
And resources, again, what's interesting is they're broadly defined. It could be your skill level, could be the amount of time you have, it could be your experience. It could just be the feeling that you could turn to someone if you were in a crisis, but you don't even have to have that conversation. So like a freshman in college, just feeling like you have someone to turn to feels like a resource that I can now meet the demand of being a freshman in college. At any rate, if your mind concludes this is the demand, this is the resources, high demand, low resource, that puts you in a threat type state. What we see in your physiology is a constriction of blood vessels, especially in the periphery.
Okay.
And so the chest cavity
So
is
tunnel vision a little bit?
Yeah, so that you see like clammy hands
Okay.
because there's less blood flow in the fingers. Your chest cavity is storing more blood. And we know that because we send like an electrical signal across and you can time how long it takes.
Okay.
And the evolutionary reason for this threat type response is 100,000 years ago on the savannah, if you're like fighting a bear and you're losing, then your body wants to bleed as slowly as possible. Like you basically don't want to bleed out and die.
Sure.
So you don't have, if the bear ripped your arm off, you want to bleed as little as possible, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So your body's, and then that's where you also see an increase in cortisol levels.
Right.
And so cortisol is like the tissue in your body is getting repaired by this anti-inflammatory process. So at 45 minutes after an intense stressor is when cortisol gets released.
Okay.
And that has a whole, if people are chronically awash in cortisol, you see like the neurons in the brain don't recover when you sleep as well in the sense that you don't learn from experience. You have the same experience, but like they'll take the rat and have them learn the maze and then they'll inject their brains with cortisol. And the next day they're like, what is this maze you're talking about? I've never seen this before in my life.
Right.
So my memory's impaired. That's threat type response. That's what society means when they're talking about I'm stressed.
Yes.
And and if you care for someone when they're under that type of response and you can see them reacting in that negative way, you would be a monster to not try to help them. Right. But the problem is if you increase resources to meet demand, then you get a challenge type response. And there your body pumps more blood to your extremities because it's trying to get your muscles as strong as possible so you can defeat the bear or run away from the bear.
Yeah.
And you'd see less cortisol because your body doesn't think you're going to have damaged tissue to repair. You instead see like a surge in testosterone, both men and women.
Yeah.
And that comes from like a social victory. And they do these studies where like you do a gamble and you win and then your testosterone goes up in the lab. There's that euphoric feeling of having done something super hard publicly in front of others when you just totally kicked ass. It's something that not everyone could do. Anthropologists call that earned prestige. That you're not given prestige, you earn it with your actions.
Yes.
Feels amazing. It's not, but that's a high stress situation.
Right.
And again, if someone deprives you of all that and has that reduction in demand, you never get that feeling of earned prestige, of doing something great publicly in front of others.
Yeah.
And so we really, in our research, we just tell people, hey, when you feel that heart racing, that, all that other stuff, that's your body giving you more resources to meet the demand.
Yeah.
And that alone causes them to be in more of a challenge type state.
Right.
Rather than a threat state. And then when we have them in the lab, we see less blood flow, like less blood kept centrally, more externally.
Wow.
And a lot of that stuff. So your mindset about stress can actually change your stress physiology when it comes to performance.
We're back from a minor technical break. So the $1 million question to me is if that's true, that there is some amount of preemptive acknowledgement that we can give to athletes that like, hey, this stress thing can be framed depending on how your posture around it. What are the behaviors? Because you coach. We talked about David's a professor. He wrote this wonderful book, studied under Carol Dweck, works with Carol Dweck directly.
Yeah, I mean, I developed the first set of scalable growth mindset interventions, and so for people who know that concept,
Yeah.
Our work popularized it.
Yes.
Carol Dweck was my advisor at Stanford. We have a master class coming out in January for that website called Masterclass on growth mindset. And now that growth mindset is in lots of schools and children have to do worksheets on it, then my friends are constantly texting me saying, Yeager, what did you do? Stop.
First of all, how dare you?
You're welcome, right?
First of all, how dare you?
Yeah.
So, but David also coaches.
Oh yeah, and I coach 5 nights a week.
Yes.
And do tons of volunteer free lessons for kids.
So with that background, where you're on the academic side, and everybody is going to picture that it's just like you're you're in like Einstein's office and you've
just
got
a nerd surrounded by books.
Sure.
Yeah.
But by being in both of those places.
Yeah.
As a coach, what are your behaviors look like? What are your communications with athletes look like? Because you're kind of implicitly aware that the challenge is going to come.
Yeah.
And you want to equip them with the tools to put them in a challenge in a challenge state relative to stress instead of a threat state.
Yeah. I'm thinking about this constantly, and I don't have the full answers. But I mean, I think that one reason why I listen to your podcast is because one of the few places that I think is really thoughtful about questioning the status quo. And probably anyone our age who was in sports has some toxic trauma.
Oh boy.
Of garbage coaches.
Mm-hmm. Oh boy.
I will say that I played high school baseball to the end, and my high school coach was very successful, but was the most fixed mindset guy ever. Day one of freshman year was are you varsity material or not? And we were just starting puberty. It was 4 more years to go.
Yeah.
And 20 years later, I went back to my high school. It's in Houston, Texas, St. Thomas High School. And I was at a game, and then my coach was there. He's like, "Oh my God, David, I read about your research in the New York Times. It was in the Atlantic." And
did you now?
And he fully kicked me off the team freshman year, and didn't let me play varsity till senior year. And I love baseball more than football and basketball, but I still, Anyway, so my parents hate him. I came around to him senior year, but definitely was fixed mindset guy. Mm-hmm. And he's like, "I love your growth mindset research." I'm like, "Oh, that's great." I was like, "Why do you love it?" He's like, "Well, because I'm my district's growth mindset coordinator."
Oh no.
I was like, "Oh my God, I don't know what to say." All right, thanks, coach.
Yeah.
And so that's just a long way of saying that there are lots of ways to think you understand that concept.
Yes.
And have it in name only. And then it becomes like any other nonsense pop psychology thing that is more a way for you to tell yourself you're doing a great job rather than an actual challenge to do a better job. And I think that Carol Dweck and I fight a lot against this complacency of growth mindset is positive thinking, or growth mindset is loving failure. Well, learning from failure is awesome.
Yes.
But while you're even great people who learn from failure, they don't love failure while they're in the middle of failing.
No, you can't.
Yeah. And in fact, the defining thing is that you care deeply about the outcome and it's not happening right now.
Yeah.
And the brain will naturally feel I don't feel good doing this.
Yeah.
And but the growth mindset is all right, well, I need to suck it up and look at my failures and my flaws and see what lessons I can learn from them. So I would say that I take that philosophy of creating a challenging situation that's harder than the kids are maybe used to. I want them to see their failures, and then I want to immediately frame it as an opportunity for learning. But if that's all you did, then they could easily think of you as a sadist or a monster. Why are you making me fail all the time? And I realized for a while that we were great in our experiments and I should probably define growth mindset as simply the idea that you can grow and develop your abilities with the right support under the right conditions.
Yes.
It's opposite of the fixed mindset, which is that you're born talented or not, and if you're in the non-talented condition of life, then you will never be successful, or you might be middling for a while, you could level up a tiny bit, but you'll never be actually meaningfully good, and therefore effort is pointless, because if you have to
Right.
try hard, it
Right.
means you're not in the naturally talented group.
Correct.
And then fixed mindset becomes a problem, because then people hide flaws and deficiencies, so they avoid publicly outing themselves as in the untalented group. And so we think that's fixed mindset's a bad thing. A growth mindset is helpful.
Yeah.
But the way it gets applied is sometimes really problematic. And also it has to be accompanied with other relational things with the coach, I've learned. And what really taught me that lesson was right after I got tenure, I spent 2 years in the back of the class of America's greatest freshman calculus professor. And he's notoriously great at growth mindset stuff. And
Okay.
the reason calculus is relevant to baseball is it's super duper hard. And anyone who wants to go on to a career in engineering or whatever has to go through that rite of passage.
Right.
And most kids fail and feel confused and lost and frustrated, et cetera. And I think a lot of more challenging baseball is a lot of like that. So what does he do? He doesn't just give impossible math problems and then say, all right, time to thank me for making you all get a C in this class. Every single class period, and it's unbelievable. His name is Uri Treisman. He won the MacArthur Genius Award for his teaching in the 90s. He's like, look, I'm about to give you problems that are harder than a normal calculus class. In fact, his friend teaches the Harvard freshman calculus class, and they give the same exam. So you're at a public school, UT Austin, you're going to take Harvard freshman calculus in this. And I'm doing that because I'm taking you seriously, and I think you will be at the frontiers of your field of mathematics. You're not going to like memorize this stuff. You're going to be teaching other people this stuff in 10 to 15 years as a leader in your field. So he frames the challenge that leads to the frustration, that leads to the failure and growth, as a sign of respect of me taking you seriously. So him being the cause of your failure is a compliment to you and your potential, rather than he's a monster or a sadist. And I'll tell you what, they don't like it initially. He says on the first day, this will be so hard you will cry. And that's totally true. They cry all the time. You'd think world's greatest teacher, no crying. Not true.
Right.
But they're crying because actual calculus is hard. For thousands of years, human beings did not know calculus.
Right.
And you have to now memorize it in 3 months. Like, it's unbelievable what we ask people to do. And I think there are parallels to baseball. You can create a training environment, and I try to do this, that's way harder than what they need to play 8 or 9U at the lowest level of fall ball.
Right.
And they don't like a lot of that failure initially. And if I'm not invested in, like, I'm taking you seriously, I'm going to treat you like a real baseball athlete, even if you've never played before and you're generally super unathletic.
Yeah.
But I'm taking you seriously because I want you to have the joy of having the choice, as you guys say all the time. I want you to have the choice to get to high school and decide to play, get to college and decide to play. So I treat every kid like, if you take this seriously and you improve your body movements and you learn how to swing hard, and there's a lot of driveline equipment in my house, to be honest. And you do this stuff and take it seriously, like, you can seriously improve, and then you have a lot of fun. But it's not easy.
Yes.
And so that's kind of, I had to learn to make growth mindset not be just a belief in their potential, and had to be backed up by my relationships with them. I'm still learning how to do that. But I would say that in my journey as a coach, I started out probably with an advantage on growth mindset, but not knowing anything else. So it led me to scour the internet and find probably a lot of things that are not great. And I'll
We've all been there.
And I do want to talk about that, but I'll just end this answer with an anecdote that we played some team in 8U in the spring, and we lost like 22-1 or something, because you can score infinity runs, which I didn't know until I started coaching. It's like, no, well, it can be an hour and a half, and there's be one team batting, and we drove an hour and a half to get here. So that happened to us, and I talked to the coach, and he was very nice. And I was just so baffled. I'm like, look, my son, my 8-year-old, pees his pants and cannot tie his shoes. And your kids know that on a dropped third strike with bases loaded and 2 outs, they can throw to first, but not, like, your kids know these insane rules about baseball, and we don't have shoes tied. So how do you do it? And he was like, the most important thing is that your team has a growth mindset. I was like, that is the only thing I do right. I was like, I don't do anything else better than that. And we got murdered.
Yeah.
There's got to be more to it.
Yeah.
So, like, yes, you do have to have a growth mindset. You have to learn from failure. But it's also like, all right, once I've got a kid in a state where they're ready for challenge, they believe in growth, what do I actually do with you and how, what environments and constraints? And I think that's where the expertise you guys have of intentionally creating failure experiences with respect to a goal that they care about.
Yeah.
Has to be accompanied with a mindset in which that challenge is a positive thing they're excited to do rather than a threat that means they'll be no good.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, when you started talking about that calculus class, the first thing I started thinking about was the Shohei sweeper.
Me too.
I mean, that was literally the first thing I thought about. And we're also, we've got a development of a new training product that we're going to launch that's really strictly just relative to like the local facilities, and kids are going to be able to come in and do some extra hitting. And the way that I've started thinking about this is trying to do it programmatically, where we're going to introduce you to the action and the activity, and we want to see like a decent chance of success. Then there is going to be a challenge, and in that challenge, I don't expect success. I expect you to understand. Well, and this is the tricky part. I can expect you to understand that it is going to be a challenge and that there is value in going through that challenge, even in the absence of success in the action. But the more that we're having this conversation, the more that I'm thinking about how like it really is beholden on us to, I think, do the thing that we did with the Shohei sweeper when we had the academy teams doing it, which was like name it.
It was, I don't know if we talked about that in the pod.
I don't think we did.
But that was an interesting thing we did on one Friday night a couple weeks ago was we had the pitch that they were seeing out of the iPitch machine was literally to the metrics, Shohei's sweeper.
And I showed David the video of it.
And that's just a nasty pitch that every time they show a Dodgers game, they're like, this is the most insane pitch that's taken over baseball.
Pretty gross.
Yeah, that a 15-year-old will never see in game, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no chance.
Yeah.
And they struggled with it at first, up until they found out what they were seeing, because their expectation is ball's coming out of the machine. I'm supposed to hit this ball. Yeah. As soon as we told them, this is actually Shohei's sweeper, that expectation kind of went out the window, and they were able to actually hit the ball and perform, having named it as this is what you're seeing.
I actually think this is really profound that you guys did this, because if they think they should be able to accomplish the task if they were any good, that's the default.
Yes.
If I was good, I'd be able to do this. Then any miss or flaw is a sign that they're not a natural.
Right.
But if you name it as something that, okay, the best players in the world can hardly touch this pitch,
right,
then the attribution in their mind is different. Like an attribution, I mean like the explanation of the cause of the event in their mind is, oh, this external task is super hard, and so on. Now, the other challenge is like explaining to them not just what it is, and therefore you're not flawed for failing, but also why are you guys choosing to do this to them?
Yes.
And Uri Treisman, not to make everything about freshman calculus, but I love this example. If you remember calculus, there's something called L'Hopital's rule. It's how you get the limit of any function.
Okay.
L'Hopital's rule is like a trick to find the limit. It's not like an analytical solution, so it doesn't work all the time. And a normal teacher would give you 5 L'Hopital's rule problems. You'd be like, all right, solve these 5 hard problems, and you optimize and perfect. Uri will give you 1 where L'Hopital's rule works and 4 where it doesn't work, and not tell you which one.
Sure.
So they are looking left and right with all these freshmen that are supposed to be the smartest in the state of Texas, and they're like, what the hell's going on? But before he makes them struggle on finding where the rule's broken, he says, look, I'm going to give this to you because I respect you. You're future leaders in your field.
Yeah.
4 of these don't work. It's up for you to find out. So don't expect to solve the problem in 30 seconds, because these are supposedly smart math kids who are used to doing it. So there actually is an analogy of like explaining why you've chosen to give them the failure.
Right.
And the idea of, because I'm taking you seriously, and don't look to your peers and think if you're slower than them at getting it, that there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, I mean, because, our kids see breaking stuff all the time. They see a wide variety of breaking stuff because we lean into that, but the Shohei sweeper is kind of like, that's the top of the food chain challenge.
Yeah.
Like that's very much the thing. And to a degree, and tell me if I'm connecting these dots incorrectly, the thing that I'm starting to think about now is what you talk about in the book about wise feedback.
Yeah.
About why that type of feedback, when you kind of just, you don't establish that, like, you guys are the future leaders of the field,
Yeah.
right? This feedback I'm trying to provide is because I see something in you.
Yeah.
That to me, and again, I want to give you the floor to kind of like explain this idea of wise feedback in a much more illuminated place than I can give it. But like, I think when it comes to this application of these type of ideas in coaching, it's a very different thing to put the showy sweeper out and just say, why can't you? It's a pitching machine. Its job is literally to deliver hittable pitches. Why can't you hit? That's a very different framing than, hey, we're dusting out Shohei Sweeper because we want to see how you guys can do it. I mean, I think there's a little bit of implicit like, hey, this is within your capacity, because if it wasn't within their capacity, we wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Right? So am I connecting these dots incorrectly, or
Yeah,
is this all
the footnote is that you can design the training environment that's designed to evoke failure and still have them interpret it in the worst possible light.
Sure.
Right? That they're trying to rank and sort me. They're trying to figure out who's the most talented, who are they going to advocate, and not that you guys do this, but like who are they going to like call the scout and be like, this guy's great,
Yeah.
or like implicitly there's an unspoken hierarchical ranking, and they're trying to separate the men from the boys kind of situation.
Right.
And that's most likely not what you're trying to do. You're trying to challenge everybody and have them learn from failure or whatever. But what I write a lot about in the book is that because young people in general are used to having adults evaluate, sort, and rank them, they will assume that's what we're doing at all times,
Yeah.
unless you're 100% clear that that's not what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I just visited UT Austin's women's volleyball team. I'm kind of studying their coach is super inspiring. They won the last 2 national championships. They're going for a three-peat. And they track the jump length and hit speed of every action on the court, every single practice. It's a massive database.
Yeah.
And the players could easily think he's trying to decide who gets playing time based on your jump, your hit, all those other things. So he's 100% transparent about this is about helping us manage your load so that you're not injured when it's time to go on our playoff run.
Right.
Right. It's always clear. And chapter 5 in the book is on what I call transparency. And the punchline is we have to be about 3 or 4 times more transparent with what we're doing than you think you need to be.
Right.
Not because young kids are sensitive these days and they're just a bunch of like wimpy idiots who need their hands held. It's like, no, they have legitimate reasons to distrust what we're doing to them because of how as a society we tend to like rank, sort, evaluate, judge,
Sure.
blame, and shame them. That's
Sure.
what they're used to. And so the explaining the reason for the Sohi sweeper, but not assuming that they know that they will view it in the best possible light. That kind of thing is why I write about wise feedback in the book.
Yeah.
And so just to explain for the listeners what wise
for sure.
feedback is, the wise feedback is, which I'll define in a moment, is the solution to something we call the mentor's dilemma.
Yeah.
And the mentor's dilemma is very simply the idea that anytime I'm criticizing someone else's work or performance or behavior, I have a tough choice of either being hypercritical and pointing out all your flaws, but then risking crushing your spirit, or being super positive and friendly and almost lying to you, suppressing the honest truth, but letting you know that I care about you.
Yeah.
And
I mean, you could call it the manager's dilemma.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
that's it.
it's and I see this with bosses. I write about my best friend Alex Sweeney, who's an ENT surgeon at Baylor Medical School, and he came to me. He's like, my job is cochlear implants. I give people hearing, and he's the best in the world at this. And when he was a chief resident at Bentop Hospital, he couldn't get the junior doctors to listen when he gave them critical feedback.
Right.
He's like, I'd make people hear and I can't get them to listen.
Sure.
This is so ironic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I hear the same thing from lawyers who are partners at firms, and they hire 23-year-old like Georgetown law graduates and supposed to be the best and the brightest. They critique their legal briefs. They're like, this is not ready to file to the Supreme Court. I'm sorry, it's not.
Right.
It's great. I'm glad you did it. It's not ready. Here's all the feedback. And then the junior people are like, they think I'm never going to make partner.
Right.
Right. I hate this person. Why are they being hypercritical? So the young person doesn't receive the feedback well and views it in the worst possible light. And the manager is saying, Jesus, I billed $1,000 an hour. This was $2,000 worth of feedback I just gave you.
Sure.
It's like very expensive. That's how much I'm investing in you.
Yeah.
And so the leader is saying one thing, the young person is hearing another, and then there's a fight over the misinterpretation.
Yeah.
That's the mentor's dilemma. It feels like a perennial conflict between the generations that we'll never solve. And that's 100% true with a parent telling a kid you're hitting wrong
Right.
or you're throwing wrong.
Right.
Right. And again, they're going to view that negative feedback in the worst possible light. In our research, we came up with something. This is Jeff Cohen initially wrote the book called Belonging that I recommend. This is my Stanford collaborator. He coined this term wise feedback, which is before delivering criticism, to preface it with a transparent explanation of your intentions. Specifically, I'm giving you these comments or this feedback because I have very high standards, but I know that with my support and so on, that you can meet those high standards.
Yes. Yeah.
So the two pieces are the appeal to the high standard. So that way you don't come across as biased or I hate you. It's like, look, this is standard. But second, letting them know that they're included in that standard.
Right.
It's not like being at Six Flags where you have to be this high to ride and see you later if you're not. It's like, this is tough and we're giving you the feedback so that you can meet it.
Yeah.
Now, coaches naturally can be in that position. Like if you're a player and the coach is ignoring you, that's when you should worry, right? It's like if you're getting the feedback, it's like the coach believes in you. And most kids kind of get that. But again, in a hyper-competitive, like evaluative situation, they will presume the worst unless you're super transparent. And we ran an experiment in the academic setting. 7th graders wrote first draft essays of their, just essays in social studies class. And the teachers covered it with criticism. And they implicitly did something we call the compliment sandwich.
Yes. Right.
And the
we
compliment
we
sandwich.
literally just had a coaching training meeting just this last weekend and talked a lot about compliment sandwiches.
Yeah.
So when I started reading that in the book and kind of talking about the problem with the compliment sandwich, if it's not grounded in something and it's not to a degree like confirmational or aspirational for the person that's receiving it, then the sandwich just kind of falls apart.
No one wants to eat the sandwich.
And I find that like most of the time the compliments are very stock, like generic, and then the feedback in the middle, the criticism is like very pointed.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, oh well, okay, like I clearly see what you're trying to do here, and
there's a conversational norm where it's obvious that they're critiquing you,
right?
And in this fundamental way, they're not really affirming your potential,
right?
And like the classic one is, I love your enthusiasm. All of your behavior is bad and has to change.
Right.
Yeah.
But thanks for coming on time or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in your mind, you're like, oh, mental math. Okay, 2 positives and 1 negative.
Right.
Like you're balancing equations and chemistry.
Hey, you've got a great smile. You look like you just got ran through the garbage compactor.
Yeah.
But like your eyes are beautiful.
Yeah.
Like
right.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in the book, I argue that it fails on 2 levels. One is that it's an obvious attempt to placate someone.
Yeah.
And kids, again, they read between the lines.
Yeah.
Like the moment puberty strikes, they're looking at the implied meaning of what we do, not the literal meaning. And that's why if a parent says, don't forget your coat, the kid's like, I'm not an idiot. It's like, well, I did not say you're an idiot. I said, I want you to wear a coat.
Yeah.
But what they heard was something different than what was meant. And so again, if they notice that we're trying to manipulate them with stupid compliments, they will be like, and they think I'm an idiot.
Right.
Right. It's not only do they doubt my ability, they also think I'm so stupid that I would fall for this. Right.
And they probably also have an implicit understanding that they're learning a lot. And there's a lot of stuff that they aren't good at yet.
Yeah.
But then, I think as parents, sometimes when we're like, it feels like you're harping on a developing skill that the kid understands as a developing skill. It's just like, all right, well now why are you just like doubling down on me? You know, and But it's hard as a parent to not, right? Because I think a lot of times we see that as, if I don't stem the tide of this whatever systemic flaw with your behavior is now, then I'm forecasting you being as like a non-viable, non-functional, non-contributing to the society as a person in the future, and then that's not tenable, so I have to like attack the flaw now.
They're right. And then the other layer is the social layer of other parents judging you for not having corrected this obvious and easily correctable behavior.
Sure.
So it's both. I'm projecting my kid being a failure who can't, tie their shoes as an adult,
right?
Or is just a monster. But other people are judging me as the kind of parent who never got around to caring enough about my kid that I fixed this obvious flaw. And I think that's true when kids throw a tantrum in public. Mm-hmm. I think it's true if their grounder mechanics suck on the field.
So glad you went there, because I think that's exactly it. And I've been going on this rant.
Way more about parents' anxiety about how they look than it is about the kid's performance.
Yeah, I mean, I've been going on this rant for years that I think that the reason that youth sport is in the position that it is right now, where we've kind of like professionalized the experience and our preference for outcomes, is simply because as parents, and that's the majority of the coaches and that's the majority of the decision makers in the ecosystem, we largely are trying to orient for like the least embarrassing outcome. I don't want to see my children's failure play out publicly in front of other parents, because it suggests that like there's a thing that I didn't do. And when you have dad coached teams who basically suffer that same flaw, right? We don't want to lose a game because my kids aren't equipped with a tactical understanding of the first and third situation.
Yeah.
Right? If we lose because of that and another adult exposes my lack of preparation for my kids, then like my dirty laundry is right on my front porch.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to be in that position.
Right. Well, and then you're also in the like parent ranking hierarchy. And
of course,
I mean, the moment you have a kid, you feel judged by other parents. I mean, we had my daughter when we lived in San Francisco. We were 28, which is like saying you're 12 to have a baby in San Francisco. Like the modal age for first child is 40 there.
Oh boy.
So they were like, you guys are teenagers. I'm like, I was a graduate student. I had a real job. But everyone's like, oh wait, what kind of stroller do you have? Like, oh, is that plastic on that toy? Right. And like the judgment starts then and it never stops.
Oh, you're giving your kids seed oils?
Right. So like, I just think, for the book, I interviewed this amazing parenting coach. Her name is Lorena Seidel, and she's on the East Coast. And if you, like, money's no object, and your house is chaos, and everything's on fire, she's the person that you contact so that your kids are actually great. And I visited the homes of families who had worked with her, and I was like, oh my God, your 9-year-old is, like, taking his plate to the sink on purpose. And, like, no one's telling him to do that.
Honey, we got a phone call to make.
Yeah. And if you're wondering if I interviewed her for the book more than I needed to, the answer is yes. And I'm so happy with the parenting advice I got. And it's by no means make me a good or even great parent, but I certainly improved in some areas. And one of the things that she emphasizes is that it's the fear of the imagined audience that makes parents go nuts. It's what would it mean about me and my parenting if my kid was doing X? And we're hardly ever reacting to what the kid actually did. Yeah. We're reacting to what it would mean about us as a parent.
And I mean, I look, for anybody that's got younger kids, I can confirm what David is saying still exists when they're like on the cusp of turning 18 and graduating high school.
Yeah.
It's still a thing, because there's this constant just like pissing contest about where's your kid going to college, right? Like what, I mean, that's a whole thing. And I think there's already enough social dynamic in play for the kids about that type of stratification.
Yeah.
Then you add on the parental layer, and then you add on children feeling like their parents are judging them, right? About whether their behavior is going to make the child less likely to be judged, whether it's going to make the parents less likely to be judged. Like, it's a fairly all-encompassing just threat environment.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I think that's I think that there are pockets where it's mostly great and parents are mostly supportive. Sure. But I think even in those places, you still worry about this narrative. And I think that it's easy to kind of, for us as parents, overreact. And for people worried about where their kids go to college, as a developmental psychologist, I'll say that, I mean, Raj Chetty has all tax returns on all Americans over like 60 years, as a Harvard economist. And parental education matters a lot more than like where kids go for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And which is a kind of depressing finding. But you know, in general, the premium on higher education has never been higher throughout American history.
Yeah.
But if your kids can go, and then it's kind of like they benefit a lot.
And I'm pretty sure that there's just like a direct parallel between this conversation we're just having about the way that parental behavior plays out in the relationships we have with children, in the relationships we have with other parents, like the social economy therein, and on baseball fields.
Yeah.
Right? Like I just got tagged in a thing yesterday about a 10U fall ball game where the kid went like 6 innings in like $120.
Pitches?
Yeah.
Jesus. Yeah, the team we played this weekend, they let their 9-year-old pitch 100 pitches. I was like, really? You shouldn't do this.
And you know, it's I don't know, I truly don't know how to do anything different. You know, I think one of the things we do is we try to, you know, you bring, you know, sunshine is the great equalizer, right? Like we bring this stuff to light on the pod because we've got 150 plus thousand people that listen to this thing, and hopefully some amount of those people are coaching. So there's like a 12x multiplier on our listenership, right? And we think that if you're convicted enough about this very niche subject that Jeremy and I talk about on a weekly basis, that like hopefully your behavior is different. But I'm also aware that there's, you know, somewhere between 16 to 20 million kids playing some version of youth and amateur baseball in this country right now.
Yeah.
So even if I 12x, right, the 150,000 people that listen to this, and I say we've got somewhere around like 500,000 people that have been influenced, that's 1/40th.
Right.
Right.
I mean, there are great, like, Positive Coaching Alliance is really good. I
100%.
like, and so I think there's everything we're saying is not inconsistent with the organizations that are thinking deeply about it. But it's not just baseball; it's all the sports. Probably like 10 years ago, I got contacted by the U.S. soccer people. So they run the youth academies. There's like all the MLS teams. I don't fully understand it, but there's MLS teams, and then there's youth academies that go all the way down to 8U under those.
Yep.
And they, this gets back to parents overcoaching stuff, I promise. But the problem they had is that America has great youth players up to 15 or 16, and we could play with anybody in the world. We can, we could play with Brazil. We could beat Brazil. But when you get to the, World Cup pro teams, we get crushed.
Yeah.
And a reason why their hypothesis is that we build super teams when kids are young, and then kind of like anyone with a British accent can start one of these
Immediate
super
authority.
teams, and then they win every trophy.
Yeah.
And all the parents then pay to. So the guy's not a good coach, but he's British and has trophies. And then all the parents, because they're hyper attuned to status and being the best, put all their kids on that team. And then those kids just kick the ball super far down the field and run and score. And they never learn how to play 3 or 4 passes ahead.
Yeah.
And so the and on top of that, parents are constantly yelling at what their kids should be doing on the field.
Oh yeah, it's Rock'em Sock'em Robots, man.
Yeah, they're trying to and so the youth soccer people, the guys running youth academies, went to like Germany and the Netherlands, and just watched youth soccer games. They call it football there. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah. I learned that in this project. Just kidding. And it was shocking because you go to a hyper-competitive U.S. soccer game, 10, 11, 12, the noise, it's 100 decibels, right? It's chaos. Nobody talks in Germany. It is like a golf match when they're putting. Like you could hear a pin drop. And the coaches aren't even talking. The only people talking are the players. And maybe the coach would say something during timeouts or whatever, but parents like maybe would clap, but otherwise total silence. And it's because they know the players need those 10 years of 8 to 18 playing the game in their heads.
Yeah.
Playing 3 passes ahead against high levels of competition where you can't just dominate. How often are parents yelling at kids where to throw the minute they get the ball?
How often
Right?
are
In
parents
baseball.
and coaches like giving conflicting instruction to a kid who's like trying to make a decision in the field?
I mean, just watch
Right?
any catcher drop a third strike,
Oh my God.
Yeah.
and how many people yell at them.
I mean,
I don't know how any kid ever does it right.
Right.
It's just everyone's yelling at the kid.
I've seen like, first and third plays with 2 dead and, there's a ground ball hit and there's, some parent is like screaming at a kid to like not advance.
Yeah.
And then the kid is like listening to the coach and trying to tell him something different. And then they just get frozen. They get literally frozen because it's like trusted person. I'm caught in the middle.
Right. They don't know what to do. And the kid wants to do a good job. Even if they don't want to win, they want to help their teammates.
Yes.
They want to they don't want to let their teammates down. They're like, I just drove to this tournament. I'm going to screw up and make everybody lose. And I'll just say, when I started my coaching journey as super mediocre free coach for kind of beginner players, I was struck by my son's 11, 12U coach, and who joined the Zoom.
Yeah.
And they'd be in an inning where it's like they just gave up 8 runs in a row because it's like walk, error, walk. And like they're good players, but it's just the kid loses command, or his guy would already go 50 pitches. He's like, I'm not going to pitch him 100. It's the next guy. He does everything right. He never once told a kid where to throw. And he told the parents, do not coach from the stands. And they didn't. And so they'd make errors.
Yeah.
But then after the inning, he would pick one of those errors and be like, all right, right fielder, got to hit that cut, or throw it in. Don't run it in or throw it in, but don't hold it. And before he would correct the one kid, there would be 10 errors. He'd be like, I'm not picking on you. I love you guys. Here's what we got to do better. Focus on this. And I want everyone to listen to this mistake. And he'd pick one.
Yeah.
And tell you what, if you do that enough every game, then those kids by the end were, winning games. They were winning the tournament.
Yeah.
And it's because they were playing the game in their heads, and they saw his trust in them. And he never made them think that his criticism was coming from a bad place.
Yeah.
And that gets back to the wise feedback, just to close the loop on our mentor's dilemma.
Yes.
Thing. Wise feedback is before, when I give you the corrective behavior, being 100% clear, I'm doing this because I care about you. I believe in you. Not in a glib way. I'm patting you on the back. I'm trying to placate you, but like honestly and authentically. And it's not about me evaluating and judging, looking down on you. It's about me empowering you to be more awesome.
Yeah.
And in our experiment where we had the kids write the essays, the teachers critiqued them. They tried to do the compliment sandwich. We put a handwritten Post-it note where it said, I'm giving you these comments because I have very high standards and I know that you can meet them. Yeah. And the kids were twice as likely to revise their essays.
Yeah.
And tell you what, I have 4 kids. If twice as many of my kids listen to me, then like 2 out of 4 would have pants on before we went to school.
Yeah.
Like, that would be great.
I'm just literally in my head thinking about the next time I have to talk to my son about syncing and charging his pulse sensor, what that conversation is going to look like.
Yeah.
Because I think I've, if I'm critical of myself, I don't know that I've done a good enough job at saying other than, like, honestly, like a lot of my parenting in that regard has just kind of been like honestly, like, man, get it together.
Yeah.
But that's very different than like, this information gives your coaches the best possible ability to help you get better. And if getting better is a thing that you want, and it's a thing that you're definitely capable of, then you have to help them.
Yeah, and also like I'm taking you seriously as an athlete.
Yeah.
Like you might not be a professional athlete now, but I'm treating you as though you're taking yourself seriously, and that's because you told me this is something you care about.
And I think that's the thing. 2 episodes ago, Jeremy and I did like a really long podcast that was supposed to be about recapping our competitive record for our Washington teams after our 4th season. And we had the best win-loss record we've ever had. We had the type of performances that we've been building for like 4 years. And we went into it kind of wanting to talk about that, and I think the overwhelming majority of what we talked about was process. And to me, that's the thing, is that I think we can, tell me if I'm wrong, I think we can exist in that space where, to me, the growth mindset stuff is just a direct corollary to this developmental approach that we want to bring to youth baseball, which is the opposite of your high school coach, right? My high school coach.
Yeah.
A very fixed mindset where it's just like the kids that are good are going to play and the kids that are not good are not going to play, right? Yeah. We fundamentally believe that we can bring like this equity of opportunity by deploying the system across ages and skill levels. And like ultimately it just kind of comes down to you. And for some kids, we get to the point where they're 15 and 16 and the future of post-high school baseball starts to become a little bit more real. And we want to apply a little bit more seriousness and a little bit more diligence with which we execute the system for those kids. But if I'm being honest, I think we do have a little bit of a better opportunity. We have an opportunity to kind of change the entry point to that conversation at scale when we say, this is a challenge that you need and it's appropriate for you because you're capable of it.
Yeah.
And I think we do a little bit about that. I don't know that we do the best job of it at scale.
I mean, in the intro of the book, I go from this wise feedback study we just discussed to a discussion of Chip England,
yes,
who's the NBA's best shooting coach. And I'll just want to draw some analogies to that. And I'm kind of curious, actually, both of you guys, what stands out to you about it. But it came about because this former NBA and college basketball player named Shane Battier, who played for Duke and then the Heat and other teams, emailed me out of the blue. And he'd read about me in some book and was like, hey, I'm curious about this or that. And he's like, I'm sure NBA players email you all the time. It's like, no, Shane Battier. Zero NBA players
of
all time have emailed a nerd professor who talks about feelings or whatever.
You get an email from Xavier McDaniel in the late 80s.
And so then I obviously took the call because I was super interested, and he was a legend when I was in high school and college.
Of course.
And then we talked about the stress work I just said. Turns out he wanted me to do a talk for his kids' coach and basketball team. And I told him about this great teacher that I had found that I write about in the book. It's a guy named Sergio Estrada, is America's best high school physics teacher. I called him for 3 years. And I was like, Shane, I want to find the Sergio of coaching. Like, who is the best at bringing out skill from everyone, not just if you have the best background or the most privilege or the best, whatever, believes in everybody, brings out the best. Obviously hoping he would introduce me to Coach K, which he did not do. And
it's
said,
funny that he didn't actually.
I know.
Right?
And instead he was like, oh, it's Chip England. And he's like, this guy's the best in the world. And he told me about how when Shane was leaving Duke, was National Player of the Year, they were champions, a lot of stuff. There were still doubts about whether he was NBA material or at least star material. Would his shot translate or whatever? And so they were running a youth camp at Duke, and Chip, who had played under Duke, he was part of Coach K's first conference-winning team. Chip was back in town, and so they did a shoot-around. And he's like, Shane, like, you're a good shot. Like, wouldn't listen to all these other people. And, like, that's not what draft experts were saying. But he didn't just stop at a compliment of, you're good, therefore anything you shoot will be good. That's the kind of fixed mindset way to think about it. He tweaked a ton of what he did and changed a lot of it and gave him a practice routine. And then, of course, Battier, had to have the grit and resilience or whatever to continually seek that feedback, be in a failure experience, all that stuff. Goes on to a long career. And then soon after that, Chip was hired by the San Antonio Spurs to be Coach Popovich's shooting coach. And for anyone who kind of follows basketball, it's a surprise that the Spurs are as good. They always had the one superstar, the David Robinson type, but really it was drafting like Tony Parker, who people thought was a bad shot, and helping them develop. And so Chip was like the one-man Moneyball strategy of the Spurs for 17 years. And so I went down and I met him at his favorite restaurant in San Antonio, which is a kind of dive Mexican food place on the side of the freeway and the strip mall. And
I like spots like that.
I thought he was like a famous basketball coach, and like, why, and I brought my daughter, who was 13 at the time, because I feel like teenage girls have the world's greatest BS detectors. And I was like, I want to find out if, like, is he the real deal? And he's the real deal. This is the guy's like, he spent the first hour just asking us questions, especially Scarlett. What are you interested in? All this other stuff.
Yeah.
And Scarlett was like, are you guys on a work meeting? Like, what is happening here? And that stuck with me. I had to cut that from the book because my publisher was like, don't write about yourself in the book. It's annoying, dude. But I like the story because he builds trust before he gets to work.
Yeah.
And he makes it 100% clear. I see you as a person, not as a means. And he didn't want me to treat him like a means, like an interview that I'm going to write about, like in an instrumental way. It's like, we're a person, we're both people, we have a relationship. And that's his approach he takes when coaching. And when he read the Mentor's Dilemma stuff, he's like, this is my fundamental challenge. A 19-year-old gets drafted, you're the top shooter, you're a lottery pick, and you don't trust that if I mess with your shot, it's going to get better. You, in fact, worry that it's going to get worse and you're going to lose millions of dollars.
Yep.
And he's like, the first thing you have to do is sell your vision. He's like, that's the most important thing, David. And I was like, what do you mean sell your vision? It's not, if you fix this, you make millions of more dollars. Because that's like a long-term self-interested argument, like suffer now and then for the uncertain possibility of reward in the future. And we know delayed discounting doesn't work like that in judgment and decision-making. Instead it was, the average NBA career is 3 years, 2.5 maybe. That's not enough time to make enough money for your family and your family's family. But if you're there for 10 years, well, now you're taking care of your family's family and their friends. And so you become a one-person source of hope and aspiration and resources for your whole community. But your athleticism is going to decline. So if you can't transition to being a shooter over time, then you can't be in the league for 10 to 15 years. And so he frames it as, I believe you could be great. You're going to have to work on a lot of stuff. But if you do it, you benefit. But you also get to be the kind of person who makes an impact on those people around you.
Yeah.
And then when he's obsessed about the position of your finger on the ball, it's not like he thinks you suck. Yeah. He's taking you seriously, not just as a player, but as a person who can contribute value and worth.
Yeah.
And it was just the most profound interview I probably had for the book. But he also did youth basketball camps. Mm-hmm. And he applies the same philosophy to like 9-year-olds. In fact, he did it, a lot of them at North Shore Country Day in Chicago. I was last week. And I talked to the athletic director. He used to watch these camps.
Yeah.
The first week of the camps, the coaches ran all the drills and obsessed about doing them right and where you stand and all this stuff. But the second half, the players were in charge of all the drills.
Yeah.
It wasn't a coach standing over you. You're doing this wrong. You're doing this wrong. Yeah. And it's because he always said, I want them to have a coach in the head the other 50 weeks.
Yeah.
They're in here for 2 weeks. The other 50, I want them to have the coach in the head. Yeah. And when I was here watching you guys yesterday, this is supposed to be, the place where you go to fix your mechanics or whatever. No coach was like yelling at kids for doing stuff wrong, right? In fact, you probably had more kids there than many with one coach than people would have thought. But it's because the players were coaching themselves in the head every single rep. And I thought that was really profound and very similar to what I think Chip is doing.
I mean, I would definitely love to say that. I think the tricky thing in baseball is that this mechanism of coaching, where it's implicit learning, right, and it's constraint based, and it's goal based, and it's environment based, it's very contradictory from how we grew up. And because baseball is just like, still to one degree or another, embedded in the fabric of America, where your kid's going to grow up and they're going to play t-ball and coach pitch and kid pitch is taught by not dudes who might spend time reading 10 to 25, who might spend time, reading about this idea of a growth mindset, and they're just like, it's flaw fix, flaw fix, flaw fix. And the first thing that's the most important part of that equation is you have to make a kid like abundantly clear about what their problem is, what their flaw is. And that's where the whole thing starts. And we intentionally try to be most of the time the exact opposite of that. I think as kids get a little bit older in the program, it starts to become a little bit more, I think, relevant, but also appropriate for us to say, hey, here's some specific flaws that you can have, right? And again, like, we talked at the beginning of the show about, the snapshot assessment, right? Like that's part of what that thing is. but it's not, here's a laundry list, right? That's longer than my legs about everything you do wrong. It's like, this is the lowest hanging fruit for you to attack right now in order to kind of increase performance, and then we're going to work up the chain.
Yeah, I was laughing when you described the snapshot, because I was thinking, like, I could imagine a parent being like, this is the finest resolution detail of all of the failed ways that I've tried to coach my kid to have a good swing. It's like, I have more information now about how I failed as a parent. And that would make sense if your worldview is that if only the kids stood and swung exactly the way you told them to and described it to them, then they would be good.
Right.
And I think people, novices, like I've been, look at slow motion perfect swings on YouTube, and then I look at my kid, and it's like, here's a long list of things I need to fix about my kid. And the extent to which it doesn't look like the slow motion perfect swing that's supposed to be means I've done a poor job, and I've let down the other parents who drove an hour to this game.
Right.
And now my kid's going to get made fun of, but the other kids are actually good because I wasn't enough of a lunatic about their swing. I think that's the typical construal.
And go one level deeper, because the thing you said, I failed as a parent.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
I failed to do it.
And it's understandable, right? Part of the parental job, and I suppose to a degree, part of the coaching job, is that like you're responsible for the output of these people. We often, to me, under-index for the amount of stuff that we just can't control, right? Because we've talked about some of the really young kids that have come in for snapshots, and man, at 9 years old, look, we can talk about, this is where you are, this is what 10, 11, 12s look like, and we can kind of talk about the path. We can talk about significant mechanical issues. But a lot of the significant mechanical issues are probably you're small, and I mean,
and weak. Yeah,
you're small and weak. Right. You're small and weak, and your smallness and weakness has like cascading, holistic effects on all these swing deficiencies that you have. And you can take action from some of that stuff, but that's a complicated answer to unpack.
Yeah.
And if the alternative in baseball is all too often, do this drill and you're going to swing like Aaron Judge, right? Do this drill or buy this bat and you're going to swing like Tony Gwynn. That is like, well, I want that, right? I want that. And if the barrier for entry for that thing is just like some money that I have in my wallet, well, okay, like let me check that box.
Yeah.
And it's flaw fix.
It's not that different. I realize I'm taking you guys away from baseball a lot, but I think that's one reason I like your podcast is because I'm thinking by analogy of so many other problems in life that baseball is just a very focused metaphor.
100%. Yeah. No, we'll go there.
And that's why I feel like the broader impact is the podcast is. But think about like teenage girls on Instagram seeing the perfect makeup and the perfect all the other stuff. And it's like, if only I had that thing, then I would be like this unattainable ideal. And they're literally filters. So it's not like metaphorically filters. Right. It's like it's literally AI generated humans. And I think that so lots of baseball parents would be like, you're right, that's the worst. Yeah. But then they're going to watch another 9-year-old with a perfect swing. Their slow motion mechanics are great. Like, why don't I have that?
Yeah.
And the psychologist Dan Gilbert at Harvard, whose work I love, always talks about how the best way to kill happiness is upward comparison.
Yeah.
Like I don't have something and somebody else has it. Yeah. And then you're unhappy with what you have. Like if you won the lottery and won 10 million, you're like, well, how come I didn't win 100 million?
Sure.
And I think a lot of parents are like that. And I mean, look, for me as a coach, it was like, all I want is for my kid to be in the same distribution as like, I don't care. I just want to be among the least worst, like, just somewhere where they look like a kid who's going to hit the ball and not like miss it if it's a beach ball. Yeah. But like besides that, I want them to help the team, have fun, but it took a year to get my kids to not look awful. Like it was really, cause they started late. I couldn't get them. I tried to get them to play earlier, but I couldn't. But my goal is not like to have a kid with the perfect swing. I want them to just hit the ball in the air.
Well, I mean, the funny thing
But
is
it's
that,
hard.
like, if I think about like the best, like really, really young kid swings that I've ever seen, most of them are kids that are like 4 or 5, and they've got like the long, skinny yellow bat, and they're just taking like an absolute G hack.
Yeah.
And like, if you really want to get into it, the kid probably doesn't have a ton of hip shoulder separation, right? Like they're probably just rotating all at once. But like the foundational movement of like getting the barrel on plane and turning aggressively and like flushing a pitch, it's beautiful to see.
Yeah.
But it's really, really young kids. And my pet theory is that like the reason you see a decreasing amount of those kids in those type of swings between the ages of like 6 through 10 is because of 2 things. I think the implements all too often are too heavy to the point that it compromises their ability to actually move them because, again, small and weak.
Implements, you mean like their game bat?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And then the second thing is that it is the influence of the upward thing. Like, all right, well, that's a beautiful swing when you were like 5, but look at this video of Mike Trout.
Yeah.
You don't look that way. So
Right.
we got to get to work.
Yeah.
And I'm probably just as guilty of anybody else.
It's
about
amazing.
That stuff.
So one of the sets of videos I'd watched earlier on, learning how to coach, was all the Antonelli videos,
Yeah.
which I like. And he's emailed me back because I was very happy that he was thoughtfully engaged with things. But anyway, he posts video of like his 4-year-old, his 8-year-old, or whatever, and all the comments are like, "Your kid's doing this wrong. Your kid." I'm like, Jesus Christ! Like this guy knows what he's doing, and like his kid's not good enough for you. Like what the hell are you talking about?
Have I told you my straight to jail Parks and Rec? Remember that? Yeah, Parks and Rec. You seen that show?
I've seen Parks and Rec.
All right. Years and years.
You mean
and
the
years,
Chris Pratt show?
Yeah. Years ago, Danny and I went down to like our local field to hit, and I got video of a lot of those sessions. I got that video for me. I got that video for him, and then this is even before like I worked here. Like I would just post it online, mostly for 2 reasons. One is I am acutely aware that like a meteor could fall on me tomorrow.
Yeah.
And in so much as social media is a thing that's going to exist after I'm gone, I desperately want my kids to know I was there.
Yeah.
And you can infer some other stuff about my childhood that's reasonably accurate about where that comes from. But the second thing was just like I knew that this was going to be like an evolutionary journey. I knew it was.
Yeah.
And whether my kids stopped playing at 12 or stopped playing at 14 or stopped playing after high school, I knew that I wanted to have evidence of that evolution. And on one day, we go down and we're just doing our normal thing, right? I'm 8 feet away from D, firm front flips. He's trying to hit balls over the fence because that's just what we did. And that day, I happen to have the camera positioned kind of a little bit north of the lefty batter's box, looking in, and I set it on like the very ultra wide setting, so I could still get that look at kind of how his swing moved, but then I could also see trajectory ball flight on the pull side. And he, when he was really young, it was very much like the Sadaharu O, where like his front like stride leg would come way, way, way up here, and he would get super, super deep one-legged coil, and then cut it loose. And that was just what he did, right?
Yeah.
That was just, and it started when we were hitting in the backyard of our house, and the only thing he wanted to do was hit a ball off the tee onto the shed that was like 40, 50 feet away. And to be able to do that, you had to come through it like a decently positive attack angle, hit a ball like, I don't know, 15
Oh
to
yeah, I've heard
25.
you tell the story. Yeah,
Right, like
that's like training the upward
Right.
swing by default.
it was
because
just
of
what
the
it was
task
just where our
doing.
house was, right? So when we
Yeah.
went to the field, it was the same intention.
Yeah.
And it was fun, so that's what we did. And I posted it, and it's like a fun, 30-second video of us hitting in a field, whatever. So to Antonelli getting lit up about his 4-year-old and his swing flaws, somebody that I kind of know who he is, but whatever, took a screenshot of that, posted it on his own social, and said anybody that lets their kid hit with this type of leg kick should be put into jail. And it was so preposterous, obviously, because he was like 8 or 9. but it really struck me from a mindset
How
perspective.
dare you spend time with your child?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, how dare you, right? But it struck me from a mindset perspective that it was really telling that the perspective of some random stranger who I have never met sees that and thinks that he is doing the world a service. If he says, don't do this, because if you do this, it's going to be that way forever.
Yeah. I mean, for me as a psychologist, like if I was using this example in my behavioral science class, it'd be like, all right, well, what's the most reasonable explanation for why, from their perspective, they thought they needed to do that?
Right.
And sometimes that reveals the culturally flawed beliefs we have.
Yes.
Right. So like in general, I mean, in my personal life, it's very hard to always presume that someone was being rational, you
Yep,
know?
me too.
But like from like a scientific perspective, it's kind of interesting that, all right, well, like how did they piece together information in the world where that's their response? And if they have a worldview where a good swing is one that follows like a defined set of sequences and looks the same in every single player, and there's good and bad ways to do it that I can only view from the side, then somebody spreading disinformation about the right way to do it
Yes.
is poisoning because you think, well, it's already so complex, there's already all these alternatives, and now they're just confusing everybody.
Yeah.
Especially if they think they're trying to help elevate the conversation. And where I think the drive line perspective would suggest that's wrong is like it's not about a task of looking good and front toss or side toss. It's a task of moving like a very fast moving ball and hitting it hard and square and
Solve the problem.
all that kind of stuff.
You got to
right?
solve the problem.
And there are a lot of ways to move your body to do it. And actually another where I thought you were going to go with the whole Piaget thing is there's this kind of nonlinear learning that happens where you solve like kind of cognitive problem and you have a characteristic error given your understanding at the time, and then that error goes away.
Yeah.
The classic example
No, I should have gone there.
is the ED is the past tense
Okay.
rule. So like a 2.5-year-old might say, I runned it over there. Right. And that's a cute, adorable thing. Most people don't think twice about it. But they're trying to solve the problem of how to take a verb they know and turn
Right.
it into a past tense.
Right.
And they don't yet know the exceptions to the rule. But you get this weird period where for 3 to 6 months,
Yeah.
your kid will say run did instead of ran. But they'll get other things right where the ED does help you make it be past tense. And so
Yeah.
on and so forth for all the other conjugations in the verb. And you basically can't like correct a kid there. And you can't get mad at them for getting it wrong. And
Yeah, because they're following a rule.
they're following a rule. They're solving the problem
Yep.
of how to communicate.
Yep.
So all of human language is a communicative problem, usually about desire or intent. That's like, what do I want or what do I need? And that's why, even if you grew up in a language-deprived environment, you would form at least some kind of language because you have needs that you need to communicate.
Right.
And so it's very similar to how you think about baseball. It's like, how do you accomplish the goal? You form a body movement that accomplishes it. Human language works that way.
Yeah.
And so temporarily you realize not everything is present tense. There's some things that are past tense. I'm going to solve the goal with the characteristic error. And then eventually you kind of grow out of it, right? You learn exceptions, you tweak, and then you realize sometimes it's ED, sometimes it's not. And physical learning is a lot like that too. And you try to like coach kids out of the ED rule, the equivalent of that on their swing when they're 8 or 9, when it's like that's working to solve the goal now.
Yep.
And later as their body changes, they'll solve the goal in a slightly different way.
Right.
Yep. And to me, and I guess this is just because I've drank my own Kool-Aid far too often, I just can't see teaching the skill of the game in a way that's relevant any way other than how we do it. Like I mean, and again, I'm here, but I'm also a dad, right? I am a dad of a kid who wants to be really good. And there have been times where like I talked to, I actually talked to the dad of a former driveline trainee who's currently an employee, early when, you kind of get that thing like, all right, well, your kid's kind of good at baseball. What does this mean? And you're trying to figure out like, what do I do with this? Because I wasn't that good. I wasn't that good. And again, 35 years ago, the world was a very, very different place relative to how do you foster a love of this thing? How do you foster the skill development in a way so that if the kid actually loves it enough that they want to continue to play, that they're in a position to do so? And I talked to this dad, and he was like, well, you should go take him to go this guy, and that guy's going to be able to, he'll be able to tell you, that you take him to go see him, he's going to tell you if the kid's good or not. And I was like, okay, all right. But around the time that I was having that conversation is when we first started coming here obviously at the old facility. It was like, there's probably a way that I can just figure this out. Like, what a good 10-year-olds look like. How hard do they hit the ball?
Yeah.
And you go to Hit Tracks and they have a public leaderboard. The leaderboard's kind of a mess because it's contingent upon you not having a 14-year-old hitting like a 10-year-old's account.
Right. Exactly.
And then you see that there's 10-year-olds that's hitting a ball that's like 87, and you're like, wow, right? But
Blast thinks I'm really good if it thinks that I'm 10.
Right.
yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean,
all green on Blast for the 10-year-old.
big green on that. But again, I'm aware that there are other people that are trying to probably do the same thing that we are, right? That they love this thing very deeply and they want to rise up the entire ecosystem of youth baseball, specifically for the benefit of its participants, right? It's not necessarily about the parents, but it's about kids who just have a shot to do this thing in a better way now. I have a really hard time seeing anything other than a growth mindset paired with a developmental approach that, again, affords everyone this equity of access to skill and athleticism as really the only other way that you can do this thing if you actually care about breaking that paradigm of the fixed mindset. You're good when you're 10, so you're going to get more attention when you're 10 through 12. You get more attention 12 through 14, et cetera, et cetera. And specifically when good just means developmentally advanced.
So my burning question for you guys revolves around taking that kind of growth mindset development approach to kids that are like really early in the game.
Yeah.
Well, really early in their skill development. They might be starting when they're 10 for the first time. And because that's who I coach, right?
Yeah.
So I do have some kids that are good athletes, like they're pro at certain sports that are not baseball.
Sure.
Like, or they're doing, this super championship stuff, or they're great hockey players or whatever. But like it's not like a hyper select team. I'd frankly be super annoyed by that. There's no way I would coach if it was like, we're the Scorpions and we're the best at like, I don't care.
10U national PG rankings.
I don't even know what that means. I don't like, so I spend, I don't know, 4 days a week right now. And I do free private lessons, pitching and hitting.
Yeah.
And it's kids where, their dad's not like, it's not like investment bankers who can pay for whatever they want. It's like just parents who love the sport of baseball and like honor it. And like, you got to play the right way, but their kid just chops down. Like they've had a bunch of reps, they chop down. Their timing is totally off. They don't know how to load. Mm-hmm. They don't know when to start loading. Sometimes they start loading like the ball's halfway there, and now they're starting to load, or they throw and they're kind of flinging it. They look at glove hands like a chicken wing. It's not. So it's just like there are certain things where, like, if they're ever going to play and look even approximately like a baseball player, they have to be told how to stand. And there are things like that I need to tell them how to move with their body. They are not, and this is coming from someone who has spent 12 months throwing your plyos with originally handle and barrel load, and then the smash, and now.
Power bat.
Thanks to your power bat, I have all kinds of questions about moment of inertia. And I was like, I heard that episode. I was like, I'm going to ask him some technical questions.
Oh
but
yeah, it'll ruin damn near everything you think you know about hitting.
But I got enough placebo information for that episode to still buy two. And so I've thrown a lot, and lots of kids again care decent. They're not hyper athletic, but they're perfectly fine youth athletes. Look the same. There's like same like kind of weird mechanics that just doesn't look like a baseball swing, and so kind of the things like how to reconcile the philosophy I believe in as a developmental psychologist of give you a task and a constraint and have you develop it.
Yep.
And then having done that for a year, And, these aren't kids where it's like the select team coach is going to be like, you're off the team because you're not listening to me. It's like, we want you to play because we have 12 children in the whole county who are going to play. And I don't want you to quit because then I have 11 like who are on your team.
Right.
So anyway, I just think that I wanted to ask you because I feel like there have to be viewers or listeners that are early on in coaching. They're just trying to elevate in their community baseball, take it more seriously so more kids have a chance to keep playing and feel great about it. But you look at a swing and it's like you are chopping down, or like it's just so weird and wrong.
And how do you solve it?
Yeah. And I think that kids here come and they're in a group with other awesome players that are great, but also their parents are investing in their, success, and it's great. And the parents are probably like, you better take it seriously when they're driving home. Anyway, I'm just kind of curious how you think about that, because there's a whole class of people who, like me, who I buy the tools, I use them all the time, and I've absolutely seen improvement for everybody with your tools. It's like we went up 8 miles an hour on our swing across like a 4-month period.
That's tight.
Doing our version of your PDF.
Okay.
Like just throwing plyos. And I was really happy when our purple cement, minis arrived. It took a while. There's a backlog, but then we got them.
We got that solved.
And I saw the boxes out here. I was like, I bet my box of purple plyos are in there somewhere. Got lost. But then you still have kids with serious technical flaws that, they're not going to keep playing at a high level. And we keep repping on the constraint and goal-based, and it's like not fixing it.
So I think there's a bunch of layers.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of layers. For me, I think the first thing that is relevant to investigate is how frequent are they getting that stimulus that's going to drive the adaptation. If it's once a week, probably going to take a longer time horizon to
Spring
resolve.
was like twice a week, but it's not 5 days.
Yeah, 2-3 times a week is probably completely fair for kids that age. That's one layer.
And I should clarify, 8 to 12 is what I'm talking about. 8 to 13. Yeah.
And I mean, again, I have some very real lived experience before I worked at Driveline, coaching 8 and 9-year-olds, bands and plyos. So I've been there. Yeah. I think consistency of application is the first thing you gotta investigate. I think the harder, so these are my first two answers are going to be like the cop-out answers, right? Is number one, consistency of application is going to be a really important thing. And if you're inconsistent with the stimulus, the time horizon for when these adaptations are going to be driven because of the repetitive stimulus is probably just going to be a lot longer. Two, the second part of my cop-out answer is you're talking about, I think, oftentimes a lot of just like the systemic movement qualities of kids, some of whom are good movers because they're given that stimulus in other forms of life that shows itself on the baseball field, and the inverse is true as well. Like, generally, the kids that I always would expect to be like decently coordinated played soccer. Young kids who didn't really play any other sport and they would just show up for like your coach pitch practice, overall movement quality is bad.
Yeah, we have a bunch of those kids where they don't know how to move athletically in any sport.
Yeah, so it's unsurprising that you would see poor kinesthetic awareness, right, and poor motor recruitment and motor stabilization and any of that stuff that Jeremy Frisch, I think is how you say his last name. You look at his social profile, and he's constantly got videos of kids that are like jumping and crawling and stabilizing and landing, and like, I would bet you if none of those kids played one game of baseball in their life and they did nothing but that from the age of like 6 to 9, you give me that team of kids as a 10 and we are going to have monsters by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Because systemically they know they're just advanced the way that they need to how to move their bodies.
In terms of like moving force, momentum, getting leverage, that kind of stuff.
I mean, coordination tasks, balancing tasks. Like if you think about the active pitching, right? The thing that we want for a kid to be able to like get that front leg up, stride out, separate the hips and the shoulders, some amount of horizontal shoulder abduction, good
It's
elbow
so
spiral.
complex. It's unbelievable how hard that is. for
Right,
kids to
and
do.
that single movement challenges so much of just like the systems of broad movement that kid brings to the table, that when they show up here for your practice at 5 o'clock on a Tuesday, a lot of that stuff was defined before that kid even rolled out of the minivan door. Like that's just, if they're bad movers broadly, it's hard to expect a lot of just like night and day difference in a short amount of time. And again, even if you're just doing the plyo drills, right? I mean, I could go on and on about the blockchain nature of our throwing drills, right? And we go from the most constrained positions to the least. And by doing so, it's going to develop like holistic throwing mechanics that are centered around getting the most out of your kinetic chain. And that's true. But if you can't balance on one leg in the parking lot before you get onto the baseball field, your ability to perform
my
that
kids
drill,
can't do that.
your ability to perform a walking windup, right, is going to be really tough. Your ability to do a roll in where you're trying to blend the linear and the rotational into one kind of seamless movement is going to be hard. And this is a long-winded cop-out way of me saying that I really, truly think that if we're talking about baseball-specific skill mechanics, we have to start the conversation with athletic skill. And those are just different things. We have to start talking about movement skill first, and it's hard to presume that we can fundamentally fix, and whatever that might mean, or just develop the skill mechanics of the sport over here if we don't pay adequate attention to the athletic stuff underneath.
So my answer there would be similar, but the only way you can do that in the chop down swing, right, is you have to adapt the muscle memory. You got to take a bat out of their hands. If the bat's in their hands, the muscle memory is going to kick in, and they're going to swing the way they've always swung, and it's going to be really hard to get that adaptation out. I would make those kids do a bunch of med ball throws, right? Med ball upswing throws.
Yeah.
For a while, put a bat back in their hands, and now the muscle memory is going to feel different when they're rotating. They're going to rotate upwards.
Yeah.
As opposed to...
Well,
And you
that's
can
what
do
I was
this
going to
on the
say.
field.
So that
Right,
is
what does the dynamic warm-up look like? Are you practicing these motions in your dynamic warm-up before you actually get to the skill practice, the drill practice, whatever you're doing?
Yeah.
Are you warming up properly and going through some of these range of motions in a proper way before you actually put a bat in their hands?
And that is what I do if I can get them. So we do the med balls and then the PVC pipes, and then we kind of build, we build toward the swing, the real moving ball swing. I can't do that with 12 kids in a practice because the throwing mechanics are just so hard. You have to pay so much attention so that they don't get the wrong, they don't groove the wrong muscle memory. And then the next part of the practice, now I have to teach the hitting mechanics. There's a guy, Baseball Positive, a website. I don't know if you know this. He's from Seattle area.
Yep, he's a local dude.
And that's the website I use to structure my practices because my kind of coach mentor, Stan, told me about it. And I printed it out, and it was 180 pages or something like that. And it was a binder. I was like, really? This is 180 pages to coach 8-year-old baseball. And then at some point, in the 180 pages, was a throwaway sentence, and he's like, and by the way, we don't coach any of the throwing or hitting mechanics here. You have to do that in another practice. I was like, what? Hold on. So throwing and hitting isn't even included in this?
Yeah.
And this is where I just I don't know how anybody fields a team of children who can play baseball without being just a full-on lunatic. It's unbelievable. It's so many skills you need all at once in the same practice.
And I think that directly explains the leverage of two things we kind of talked about. One is the super team, where you just kind of compress the best talent into one place, because if those kids have an advantage, either physical, either skill or sport-based, or a tactical advantage, understanding the drop third strike with 2 outs.
Or we played a team, they stole home when the catcher threw back to first.
Yeah.
Every time, dude, that's how you win an 8-year-old baseball game, your 8-year-olds are not good. That's so annoying.
100%. But if you train kids to execute that very simple, game theory optimal, you can be intentionally ignorant of skill or athletic development, and you're still going to mollywop most teams who their kids just aren't there yet.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that, I guess I haven't directly addressed the problem. I guess the first thing would, again, I think you're exactly right, Jeremy, that talking about getting a little bit less sport specific is probably a good idea, because If we're chopping down with a bat in our hands and you put a med ball in that kid's hands and you say, throw that as hard as you can, I know what that movement looks like.
Yeah.
And even if the player replicates their swing movement, the first time that they stuff that thing 3 feet in front of them, okay, cool. Now we have to adapt, right? And that to me is, again, just like the benefit of training with intention in environments and constraints is that that's the thing that's going to drive the adaptation in a meaningful and sticky fashion. The not great part of that answer is it takes time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just want to name the tension. The tension is wanting to tell kids something that's more of an internal focus about swinging up, et cetera, versus the constraint based. So in the Driveline Plus, you guys have a video of, I think of a kid was chopping down, and you're like I think you said, do offset open and throw a super loft ball and then try to hit it over the screen.
Yep.
And we do that now at practice, and I love that. And I, with my 8 and 9-year-olds, I do what you said, which is have them practice hitting home runs. So we get the heaviest plyo we can, and it's 20 feet away from the fence, and then it hit homers.
Yep.
And you can't do that if you chop down.
Yep.
So I fully believe that you practice the task with the constraint in a way that's fun and they want to do it. Like I fully believe that. But still, some kids, it's like, you're holding the bat here, and all you can do is drop your hands. Right. The only way you could swing up is to drop and push.
Yeah.
And I think for people that are just coming to coaching, the old way is I tell you where to move your body at all times, and the new way is give you a task. It feels like if I'm trying to do what you said, then I can't tell a kid to stop, looking like that.
Yeah.
You don't want to give the internal focus, but then I'm like, if I don't ever tell you that, you're never going to do it.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those things that, once the book got out and it was just like, all right, it's done, and I kind of have to walk away from it, and I'm going to detox from it for a while, and then I can come back and think about it. I did have a thought that I didn't do a good enough job of explaining, like, some of what we just talked about, right? If that kid just dumps the hands, right? And as soon as dump the hands, they can get in the, hey, let's try to do like a big lofty pitch in and maybe hit it over the fence, but they can't sniff a batted ball in a game because like the path is mitigating it too much.
Not gonna a beach ball. Yeah.
I don't know that we did a good enough job in the book, and this is something I'm toying about, maybe just doing like extra content that would be attached via the online resources, but like talking about like there are appropriate times to tell a kid to hit a ball square in the dirt, right? Sometimes you have to really exaggerate the correction to try to help them find a more natural place. And I do think that there's a way that you can do that through cueing, through intention, through like constraints and goal that isn't bring it up here. I mean, in an extreme case, look, I don't have a problem saying like, hey, let's just try to start with the hands a little bit closer to your ear. And maybe we do that for a few rounds because it's such just like a systemic issue that you gotta help, right? Like there's some balance there.
There are times that you have to internally cue. As much as you don't want to, it's got to be a tool in your toolbox that like you are willing to use at certain points when like you've exhausted other tools. But the way you use it, you don't want to tell a kid, this is how you're supposed to move. This is what I'm going to tell you because this is the movement I want to get at the end. And like maybe they're not going to lift their hands exactly the way you wanted to, but you still got the end result because you told them this is the goal. Like this is what I want. I'm telling you to do this because I want your ball flight to increase. If they understand, okay, like that's what he's telling me to do because he wants my ball flight to increase, maybe they're not going to exactly do what you asked them to, but they're going to solve the task that you're asking them to solve with increasing the ball flight.
Can I try out on you how I think about it, and you could tell me your reaction?
We should. Yeah, this is going to be good. We should end on this. This is going to be great.
So, if a lot of the task is to get kids in a given constraint, so they're offset open, maybe they're not striking, and the way we often do it is we want you to already be loaded, and then, but there are different ways of doing it, and then I'm going to throw, like, I often internally cue for how you get set up in the drill. Like, here's how I want you to stand for this drill.
Yeah.
And then I give you a goal because, again, novice player out of nowhere, they don't they don't step back right. Their feet, if they're doing the walk-ins, their feet aren't going the right way, and like they're offset open. They don't understand 45-degree angle. They're 9, And so I internally cue and I'll say, for this drill, here's how I want you to stand.
Yep.
And your goal is to hit this ply over my head, or your goal is to pull it up left, So I internally cue on how to stand, and then give them the goal.
Yep.
But then when it's time to swing for real, I'm like, your job is 8 out of 10 line drives or something. I've been outcome focused, and maybe we've got the blast on. I'm like, your goal is this 80% of your max or whatever it is, plus the goal. So is that a crazy way to think about it?
Nope.
No, not at
That's
all.
exactly how I would do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd love to have some bombastic thing to say, but like that's exactly how I did do it when I was coaching really, really like 8 and 9s and trying to get them to even do things as simple as like a band warm up. Trying to get really young kids to do bands is a challenge.
Yeah.
And it starts with just like how they address the fence or the pole or whatever that the band is anchored to. Because if you don't get that right, your ability to kind of go like up, out, up, down, in, it's salad, right? It's salad. So I think that mechanism, specifically with young kids, is what we want. I think with a little bit older athletes, then it's kind of like the chip thing, right? Like we want to teach them how to do the drills, and then they can kind of police themselves to a degree. We're still going to have coaches available to provide appropriate oversight, but like with the really young kids, I think that mechanism of internal in terms of the setup, trying to quality check that as best as possible, progressive degrees of autonomy to figure out if they're actually, internalizing that stuff, and then the goal.
Yeah.
The two biggest issues for me of internal cueing are, one, if they're thinking too much about internal, they're going to slow down their movements. They're not going to accomplish the task the way we want it to. And two is, if they start to get comfortable with internal cueing, they're always going to want an internal cue. And
Like
internal
they get desperate
cueing is
for it.
not a thing an athlete can really do to themselves in the moment, right? So if they're in the batter's box and they swing and miss,
Yeah, you don't want them thinking about that.
and they don't really have the ability, no matter what level the athlete is, to understand internally what they did wrong on that last swing and fix it.
Yeah.
The external cue, they do have the ability to, okay, I was under it because I fouled it off that way. That's my feedback. Now this is the change I'm going to make, as opposed to, oh, my shoulder placement was, well, they don't, the way they view their swing isn't real because they're not actually viewing their own swing.
Yeah.
So you can give internal cues that don't mess with those two things, that accomplish the task you're trying to accomplish. Because the biggest issue for me is really the second part, where I can't cue them between every swing. My kids have been coaching since they were 13 years, so most of them are 12. They're now in high school, and last year was the first time they'd played games in a very long time where I wasn't the coach.
Yeah.
You have to coach yourself.
Yeah.
You have to be able to understand what the external feedback is giving you and make the adjustment, and not just stare at me and wait for me to tell you.
That
what
is
to
something
do.
I say a lot when I'll be like, all right, step out of the box, call time. Like, we'll be hitting plyos. And I'm like, you're in the batter's box in the game, not me. Like, you have to make an adjustment. So, and there was one thing Chip does when he's doing the shooting coaches. He'll be like, someone will miss a shot, and they'll look at him basically to say what was wrong with my shot, but he won't tell them.
Right.
He'll be like, what went wrong?
What did you think?
Yeah,
Right.
what'd you think?
Yeah.
By the way, the section on Chip came out in Fast Company a couple of weeks ago. It was an excerpt from the book. I was very excited. I texted Chip. I was like, hey, Chip, the excerpt came out. And he's like, oh, that's awesome. I'll check it out when I get back. We're trying to win gold tonight. And that's because he was in the Olympic
Yeah.
Village.
Yeah.
I was like, why are you texting the loser in Texas?
That's
But
awesome,
anyway,
man.
it's really been awesome to be here, and because a lot of this is just questions that I have when I'm on a long drive listening to the podcast.
Yeah.
But also, I think, as I said, baseball is at some level, because there's these clear outcomes almost every pitch. Like, it's a microcosm of a lot of things that involve parenting.
Man,
where you don't get the outcome. Like, you parent your kid, but you don't know if they form a great relationship or do a great presentation or whatever, because there's no immediate feedback.
Yep.
And so much of what people have anxiety about and what they get wrong and sometimes what they get right happens on the baseball field.
Yeah.
And so it's fun to have a kind of a broader conversation with you guys about that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm super glad that we got a chance to do this. After last episode, we just ranked baseball movies, and now we couldn't be more in the weeds about the development of kids and the systems and mechanism by which we try to teach them not only the sport, but also just how to contextualize their lives and their performance within it. Jeremy and I are not shy about that kind of being like, honestly, that's the thing we're trying to teach.
Yeah.
We are going to produce some kids who are going to go play D1 baseball. We're going to produce some kids that someday are going to go play professional baseball. There's not a doubt in my mind. That's kind of the simple thing. I mean, honestly, like if
you can optimize for that task.
If we get the more bodies we get in the door, the more that we run our system of player development, the more that like this engine of Driveline continues to enhance the way that it develops players, that part is just going to resolve itself. And again, the more that we grow, the more athletes you get exposure to, we start to get like the top of the food chain kids that are biologically or physiologically advanced, and they do the Driveline. Like, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I am just as convicted, and Jeremy and I are just as convicted about teaching the process stuff and all like the ancillary part that comes with it, having a growth mindset perspective, like being receptive to feedback in a way that like sets you up to have a functional early 20s.
Yeah.
That stuff is the stuff that I think I care the most about.
Yeah, and I'll just say that my oldest son, who's 12, has all kinds of issues. Like he has ADHD and Tourette's, and like just does kind of weird stuff sometimes. And and decided to play baseball when he was 11.
Yeah.
I was like, dude, the kids you're gonna play against are like gonna be on TV in like a year.
Yeah.
Like you can't just start out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And so my whole life became like a Rocky montage for the last year, but not because I like care about him, being a D3 baseball player, but like you're going to be in a dugout with other kids your age who are just learning how to be sarcastic and make fun of each other. And they're not funny yet, so they're probably going to be mean while they're learning how to be funny. Yeah. Not because they're bad kids, but because comedy is hard. Yeah. And like if you're the worst but you're likable, that's fine. But if you're the worst and like you're not even trying to get better and you just really stink and you're an automatic out, it's like that's hard for someone who doesn't have friends already. Yeah. And so I come to this from the perspective of like Driveline is helping me solve the most important problem in my kid's life, which is just having a sense of acceptance in a hard world of 7th graders.
Yep.
Where their instinct is to not accept you if you're weird or different.
Yep.
And I could not be more grateful that my son had a coach that is the one that told me about this podcast that never made him feel like a loser or an outsider.
Yeah.
And he had a growth mindset with my son, not being like, you stink, you're the worst, I hate you. It's like a lot of coaches would be like that.
Yep.
And so for me, the philosophy of this stuff done right is about a lot more than college baseball players. It's like, how do you get more kids to have fun in an awesome sport where they could just feel the thrill of contributing to your team?
Yep.
It's so much fun to legitimately and authentically do something great in the eyes of other kids whose opinion you care about.
Yes.
And having tools for people to do that when parents, you often feel helpless. Like, I don't help my kid. You can't do things for your kid, but if you can create the kind of constraints where they can develop the skill where they go do it. Yep. Then that's cool.
Yeah. I mean, last episode, we named the best baseball movie of all time as The Sandlot.
Yeah.
I stand by that with my whole chest. If you feel differently, you can, whatever.
Well, it sparked some interesting conversations about consent in the Windy Peppercorn scene.
Sure, it's a little problematic through a 2024 lens.
Well, besides that,
I agree.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's when I think about the reason that I think every kid who has an inkling of wanting to play baseball should watch The Sandlot. It's because it gets to that.
Yeah, it's acceptance.
It's acceptance of human beings as they are, right? Yeah. And the only thing that we're trying to layer on top of that is like a system of development that challenges the question of like, how good can you actually be, and turn it into something that's like, how good do you want to be? And I agree that there are just like, there's some physiological stuff that we can't change, right? The 12-year-old version of Aaron Judge has advantages over the 12-year-old version of my son that like are going to be very hard to overcome in the present term. But in the long term, I truly, truly believe that if you accept like the absolute outlier part of it, if we're just trying to optimize for like a competitively and emotionally resolved high school baseball experience, both that should be accessible to every kid that ever puts on a cap and goes to play a t-ball game.
Yeah, an area under the curve, like doing that stuff for a long period in the right way should open access.
Yes.
And I think that what's important, I think, about this is baseball feels like the most elite and selective sport, or one of the most.
Often,
like
yeah.
windows narrower, but a set of skills and constraints that any kid with dedication and a goal of hitting it up in the barn or whatever it is can develop to the point where they can have fun and be competitive in high school baseball. That opens the door for a lot more kids to love this game and not feel like it's for these elite others.
Right.
It's like, can be my game too.
Because it is.
Yeah, that's what I like about it.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. That's what we're here for. Thank you, guys. I think this was a long one. Thank you for hanging in. I promise we're going to talk about force plate data.
Yeah.
we're going to continue to get more in the weeds. Next time we're going to talk about force plate data. In the meantime, go check out David's book, 10 to 25, The Science of Motivating Young People. If you're listening to this podcast, because I've seen our demo statistics, the odds that you have the opportunity to interact with and affect a kid from the ages of 10 to 25, pretty likely.
Yeah.
Pretty likely. So go check out the book. David, thank you so much for being here. We'll catch you guys next time. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks a lot.